So the last thing we want to do for the room is we want to make a little bit of trim around the doorway, right? And that's actually going to be it for the room. So when you guys make a room, it really can be just like this one, right? It doesn't have to be terribly crazy or nuts, or like maybe like a little bit of kind of like an angled wall like this, but don't make a ton of little inset walls. If you're going to do it, make sure there's those like nice little gaps. Don't make them paper thin, right? But something like this, do some an arched window or two. Get a doorway in with those little kind of trim, little panels in there. But we want to put some trim around the doorway, right? And what's really cool about this is, for the most part, it's going to be stuff we've seen before, but we're just going to get to play with it a little more. We're going to use Create Polygon tool again to draw the trim shape out, and then we're going to thicken it using Extrude in Object Mode. And we're going to do some more extruding of border edges and all that stuff, but I am going to show you a feature to the multicut tool that's neat. And I like showing trim off like this. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top view, right? So I'm going to tap spacebar, right? Remember, you tap spacebar, it minimizes, right, the perspective view, and you see all four views, your orthographic views, top, front, side. Now remember, these views are independent of the other one. So if you hit A for fit all, right, because remember, A is fit all, just like F is frame selection, in these views, it does it independent of this one. Remember, you can even do 4, right? Put your cursors over each viewport and hit 4 to put them into wireframe shape, right? So see how kind of all these viewports are kind of independent of each other? So remember, 4 is wireframe, right? 5 is shaded, right? And wireframe really just lets you see the edges and see through it. It's basically totally transparent except for the edges. Whereas 5 is shaded and it shows it filled in, right? Like it's got surface area. All right, so in this case, I'm going to put my cursor over the top view, right? Tap spacebar, and I'm going to zoom in on the doorway area. And I'm going to kind of create a little bit of trim for right around the front of it, right? It's that little kind of border that goes around doors and windows. Sometimes even like floors and ceilings kind of have their little trim or molding, right? So I'm going to go to Mesh Tools, and I'm going to use Create Polygon tool again, right? We saw this to draw the room out, right? That was how we actually were able to draw kind of a shape like we would a curve, but instead it makes a big polygon. So we're just going to use, instead of curves, because we've already done that a couple times, we're going to do a few more times before the end of the term, right? I figured, hey, get a little bit of practice with Create Polygon tool. So Mesh Tools, Create Polygon. Now this time we don't need to snap a grid on, right? We're just going to kind of freeform draw this. So I'm just going to kind of zoom in here, kind of on the corner of the door, because that's where the trim usually goes. And I'm just going to kind of do a left click to create a point, left click, left click, left click, left click, left click. I just want to create a little bit of an interesting shape, right? And this is where you guys have a little bit of creative freedom, but don't make it super simple, but don't make it really terribly complicated either. But something a little bit unique, right? So that way it's not just a cube, right? So if you remember, you just left click, left click, left click, and it makes those points. When you're happy, you hit enter, and it finishes the polygon. There's our trim shape, right? And it's just like our room, except we didn't use that snap to grid to kind of get it nice and precisely drawn out, right? Remember, snap to grid we kind of used to get it to snap right to those grid units to make a more precise kind of architectural floor plan. In this case, we don't really need that, right? Remember, I'm just Alt right mouse button to zoom in here, Alt on your keyboard, right mouse button, Alt middle to move it, right? And of course F, frame selection, right? If you want to zoom in on that automatically. All right, so but remember, in this case we don't need the snap tools for this one, and we'll be using these snap tools more as we go on throughout the semester. But Mesh Tools, Create Polygon tool, and then you just left click, left click, left click to place points, and then you hit enter when you're done and it creates the polygon. So I'm going to hit tap spacebar to go out to my 4 views again. I put my cursor over the perspective view and then tap spacebar again, because remember, tap spacebar kind of minimizes, maximizes. Remember, if you hold spacebar down too long, it can be easy to kind of quickly click on the left click on the Maya right here and change your view, right? Particularly if you're moving your cursor to somewhere else. So remember, if all of a sudden your view goes from perspective to like top, hold down spacebar again, left click on that word Maya, go back to perspective view, right? You can always change that from here as well, right? So in the panels menu here, you can change your orthographics, your perspective. You can even create front, back, left, right, top, bottom. You can technically actually even put different panels in this viewport. So I could put the outliner on this whole perspective view. So panels does give you some of those controls. All right. So I'm going to hit F because that's frame selection, zooms in a little bit. And you see it is a polygon, right? It might be invisible from the top but not the bottom. Because remember, we do have shading, back face culling on, so we can kind of see through our room, right? You notice how you can kind of see through the room? Remember, that's shading back face culling. If that's off, you'd see kind of black, right? Because black is the color of the back face. But it's often easier just to have when you're working on a room like this, back face culling on. And you notice we did not thicken the room out, right? The room is not thickened. I kind of left those booleans with a little bit of thickness there to make it look like it's thickened. We're not going outside of this room. When everything's said and done and we do a texture and render it, we're going to be inside the room. So this room does not need to be thickened. But you do want at the windows and kind of at the door, right, that illusion of thickness. And we handled this by having a little bit of geometry extruded or booleaned out there. All right, so I'm going to select that trim piece again. Left click on it. And it's in object mode, right? Hold down right mouse button over the object mode, so it's definitely green wireframe. And we're going to extrude to thicken this, right? And remember, usually I like using the regular move tools, but when I thicken, I do like using that default blue arrow, right? So I've extruded the object and it brings this manipulator up by default. In this case, I do want it because we are in thicken mode. So I just left click drag on that blue arrow, and you see it's going to allow me to thicken this up. We can keep dragging it up. And we want it to overshoot the top, right? We want it to overshoot the top. That's important. And we'll see that in a minute. And you also notice that I did put my doorway on a flat wall. Don't put it on the diagonal wall, right? Put it on one of the flat walls. Make your life a little easier on this project, right? Make sure this trim thickness goes above the top of the doorway. And then, of course, we can hit Q, right? Because Q is your regular quick key for regular selection tool. It's still in face mode, so we'll hold down right mouse button. Go to object mode. There we go. And we'll notice this is also inverted. If you actually look at it, you see how it's kind of flipped inward. So if you actually click off, see how it kind of looks like it's inside out. So remember, if you have that instance, and you see it a lot more with shading backface culling on, remember you just go mesh display reverse. So if you were to see that to be black, right, instead of kind of see-through, right, same thing, right? The polygons, the normal directions for the polygons are facing inward. So we do mesh display reverse to face them back outward. You see how now we can kind of see that as fully solid? All right, so that's how we can kind of create the starting point for the trim, right? Just mesh tools, create polygon tool to kind of draw the shape out as a single n-gon. And then in objects mode, right? Hold on, mouse on object mode, you extrude to thicken it. Just grab that blue arrow to drag it up, and you've got a thickened piece. However, trim kind of wraps around though, doesn't it? So what we want to do is we want to get that wrap shape. Now, in this case, it's going to be easier to do this from a different view. So we tap spacebar, so we can kind of go out to our 4 views. And we want to go to the front, because you can kind of see the door there. You guys might see it on the side, depending on what you put your door. Like if you put your door here, right, you're going to probably see it in the side view. So you don't have to do it exactly in the front view, but my door happens to be in the front view. It's going to be in the front side. If your door is in your top view, looking like this, you put a door on your ceiling, right, or floor. So I'll put my cursor over the front view, tap spacebar, and here we go. Now, to get this proper angle, we could do a couple of things, right? In this case, I can go hold down right mouse button, vertex mode, right? Left click drag that box, select those vertices. And of course, we can move this down to change the length, right? Because the bottom's not changing, just the top. But I could also rotate this, right? Now the problem with rotation though, 1, we're eyeballing it. 2, you notice how it tapers? That trim doesn't taper. So even if you could precisely snap this rotation, which you can, it's not going to be your solution, right? Because it's actually going to change the shape at the top here and make this get thinner, taper out. Just to show you it really exaggerated, it tapers it. If you did want this to go to, say, a 45-degree angle, because that's the angle it's going to be at, you can go over to, with your rotate tool on, right, E for rotate, you'll notice at the bottom of your modeling toolkit, right, remember modeling toolkit kind of gives you this little mini Maya, you'll notice that you have the ability to type in numerical values here. And this is the blue, right, the Z. So if I type in 45, in this case it's going the other way, so I'd type in negative 45, but you see how it would actually do it at a 45-degree angle. So you do have the ability to numerically type in those values. You could even turn on your snap, right? Relative's fine, and we could set that to say 45, right? And you'll notice when we go to rotate this manually, it snaps to 45-degree angles. In this case, I'm just going to set those back. You guys didn't have to do this. I was just showing you that you have this ability to do it, right? So you can actually tell your move, rotate, and scale tools to snap relative to the manipulator itself and not the world. These magnets up here for kind of snapping to the world features. These snapping functions are actually relative to the manipulator itself, and we'll kind of explore that a little bit more on later projects. But you can tell it to snap, you can give it the degree, and you can even numerically type in the value. That's not really what we wanted to do here, but I wanted to make sure to show you guys why rotating is not going to be the answer, but that you can do a little bit more with the rotation, move, and scale tools than you think, right? So I want to start to get you guys to see this stuff a little bit, right? Even switching to world is usually a little safer, although object in this case worked pretty well. Sometimes if you've got component on, you might see your behaviors behaving really weird for this stuff, right? So usually world's a good one to have on. And we're going to kind of delve into this stuff even more on later projects. So you don't have to worry about it too much right now. Just world usually we find for what you're doing, but it is there. I did want to at least talk to you briefly about it, but we'll do it. We'll actually officially use it on like our office chair in particular. So this is just not going to work. The rotate's not going to work. So we're going to go hold down right mouse button, go back to object mode, right? So hold down right mouse button to the object mode. What we actually want to do is we want to make a cut, like an actual carpenter would. So believe it or not, we're going to go to multi-cut. Now we know that multi-cut is set up that if we hold down control, it puts an edge loop in, right? You'll even see that if you won't use this, the default feature multi-cut more later on, you can even just left click to kind of drag through and make kind of manual, right? Hit enter, make manual ones. So you can even do that, right? So if you don't hold down control to put an edge loop in, you can just draw basically on a surface. Having said that, also, if you put your cursor outside of it, so it's multi-cut tool, if we put our cursor outside of it and left click drag, it gives us a line. So I'm holding down left mouse button, dragging, it says line. And what's cool about this line is when we let go, it puts an edge loop in at that angle. Now, the snap percentage size, we've seen that before. Right now it's set to 50. So if I hold down Control Shift, right, it snaps right to the middle of this whole thing. But when you're using not the edge loop adding function, which is Control, but the slice function, which is, you know, still multi-cut, but it's off of the surface, this will actually act like degrees. So you could put 45 in your snap percentage size. You'll see that you have some slice options down here, like slicing exactly along plane, have it ignore or delete. So there are some cool extra features there, but usually don't have to worry about those too much. The big thing is we wanted multi-cut, and we wanted the snap percentage size to be 45 for 45 degrees. And now, if I put my cursor kind of right around where the corner of the door's at, right? So if I left click drag, and then I hold down shift, you see how it snaps to 45 degree angles? And there's our cut. We can turn multi-cut off, hold down right mouse button over object, go to face, and what we're going to do is we're going to select these faces. So see how I kind of do a little box select? Just to grab this top stuff up here in face selection mode. Left click drag just so the box touches those. And we hit delete to get rid of those. By deleting those, this leaves us with a border edge loop at the top here. So I can hold down right mouse button and go to edge, double click on one of those edges, select that border edge loop, and then we can just extrude for our move tool, or to create extrusions, right? Now in this case though, if we try to grab one of these handles, it's going to do really, really bizarre and weird stuff. So you can actually see how trying to use that default manipulator when we do this extrusion is horrible. So I just hit W for my regular move tool, and since it's set to world, right, we just move it right along the world. You see how we've created that new trim part? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this and extend it way past that side, right? That's why we kind of went past, so that we had the ability to cut and get rid of what we don't want. If you have actually ever seen a carpenter do this, this is pretty much exactly the way they do it. They have a long kind of piece of trim. They measure it. They cut it at a 45 degree angle, or the angle that needs to be cut out for that particular wall angle. And then they do it for other trim. So we pull this out here. But you see how when we do that slice, it doesn't change the shape. It just puts an edge loop in at that angle. So I'm going to hold down right mouse button and go back to object mode. Remember, I'm holding down right mouse button over the object. So remember, I put my cursor over the object. Hold down right mouse button. Move your cursor to object mode. There we go. Multi-cut. It's already set to 45, right, for the snap percentage size. So once again, I can just left click drag. But you do it off the object. See how I'm left clicking dragging off of the object? Shift snaps, right? So that's what's going to put it at a 45 degree angle. Then we let go and it makes that cut. We can turn multi-cut off, put our cursor over the object, hold down right mouse button, face right? Do a little box select so it just touches that end part there. Delete. And then of course put our cursor back over the object. Hold down right mouse button, edge. There's a border edge here now. Double click on that. Selects that border edge. We can hit W to move it in if we want a little bit, right? And then we can extrude. And once again, if we grab these, it's going to do horrible things. So I just switch to W for a move tool. And we grab that green arrow, move it down. And you see how this trim's fitting around the corner of the door. And it's got those nice angles. Now in this case, if you wanted this to be flat, the easiest way to do that is actually hit R for scale. Because believe it or not, you can type in 0 for this. But also Maya, when you actually drag one of these handles to the center, it stops at 0. So if I just left click scale tool, right? R for scale, scale tool. If I just left click drag on that green handle, it'll stop at the center, which is 0. And 0 size is flat. So you can actually 0 scale edge loops or faces to flatten them if you need to. And there, if I tap spacebar, put my cursor back over perspective view, tap spacebar, there is our trim for our doorway. And it's neat because really it's mostly create polygon tool, which we've seen before, right? It's extrude in object mode to thicken. And it's even multicut, but we see that there's the slice function to multicut, right? And then we just delete some faces that we don't want, the excess, grab that border edge and extrude and move along the regular move tool along the axis. And it's cool. All you have to do is trim for the doorway, but it is going to get you guys to play with and use the slice function of multicut, as well as a little more practice with extruding border edges, a little more practice with the thicken and create polygon tools. So mostly stuff we've seen before, but kind of seeing all the different contexts you can put it in, and an actual reasonable context for what the slice tool would be useful for, right? This is part of multicut. All right, it's a great place to stop this video.